Church, good to be back with the Pine Grove family again. And as I come today, I come bringing greetings and warm affection from the VMC team and from other churches and other leaders from across the country. A new record was set in 2016 at the Golden Globe Awards. The movie La La Land received 7 Golden Globes, more than any other movie had before that. And it was somewhat of a shock because La La Land is a musical and nobody was producing musicals at the time. The movie tells the story about 2 young artists, Mia, an actress who was struggling to get more than her first audition. She wasn't getting any callbacks. And Seb, who is a young jazz musician who had no problem landing gigs, he just couldn't keep them very long. Of course, the two fell in love, and you can follow the romance line in the movie. The movie reaches its high point. It crescendos at the moment that Mia actually gets a second audition. She gets a callback, only to arrive at that audition to discover they weren't interested in her so much for her acting ability, but more as a storyteller. And so she walked in the room a little surprised with that when she got there, and they said, don't forget, she hasn't had any preparation. They said, so tell us a story. You're a storyteller. She paused at first, stumbled, and then realized she did have a story to tell. And she started talking. Quickly, the talk, probably by the end of the first sentence, because it's a musical, turned into a song. And she told the story about her aunt, a woman who pursued her own art, her own craft in life, and didn't give up easily. She was a woman who had some bumps along the way, some missteps, but she kept pursuing it. A woman who took some risks along the way. She lived life on the edge a little bit. And in the process of pursuing her art, she provided for Mia the inspiration for her to pursue her own career in theater. The song, which I think captures the overall theme of the movie, has some interesting lines, and I'd like to read an excerpt from it. Quoting her aunt in the pursuit that she had for the arts and her passion for the arts, quoting her aunt, she told me, "A bit of madness is key, to give us new color to see. Who knows where that will lead us? And that's why they need us. So bring on the rebels, the ripples from pebbles, the painters and poets and plays. Here's to the fools who dream, crazy as they may seem. Here's to the hearts that break. Here's to the mess that we make." In talking with a friend about the movie, I said I kind of enjoyed it, and he said, he thought it was awful. He saw it as nothing more than pure fantasy. He thought it was an exercise in escapism from the real world. I disagreed with him. I thought the movie did a good job of reminding us how much the world needs artists. Bring out those painters, bring on the poets, bring on those who write plays, because those who have artistic ability have a transcendent capacity to inspire us to something better in life. And so even in the Old Testament, we see God blessing his people with creative types, with artisans who designed the tabernacle, who put the temple together. Great musicians in the Old Testament who would lead the people of God in praise as they marched into the courts of God. Think of somebody like David himself, who was blessed with this ability to write music and to play and to sing. It was so good that he was able to minister to the king and to soothe his heart. And think of those Old Testament those Old Testament poets. The ancient Hebrew poets, if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have good chunks of the Old Testament. So even God blessed his people with creative types. But my only concern is at times, sometimes we, in wanting to lift up this class of creative types, it's almost as if we believe creativity is their exclusive domain, as if the rest of us have no part in that. I don't believe that's the case. In a way, all of us have a creative thrust and responsibility within us. Back in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, there we read that human beings men and women, were created in the image and likeness of God. We're never told what it means to be created in the image of God. I think it's important to pay attention to what's said in the verses that follow. There we're given this invitation, probably more a mandate, to be fruitful and to multiply, to create and to fill the earth. We're called there to subdue, to rule over the earth. And with that mandate, God is inviting us into his very own work, his own creative task. You go back to the beginning of Genesis chapter 1, and there we read that in the beginning there was nothing but formlessness and void, and God begins his creative act. We read about 6 days of creation. Interesting, on the first 3 days, God transforms the chaos and he turns it into order. He creates the structures of this world. He creates empty spaces. And then on the next 3 days, he creates beautiful things, beautiful objects to fill those spaces. So when we're created in the image of God and told to be fruitful and multiply and to subdue the chaos, we are being invited to participate in the creative work of God himself. All of us have a creative capacity. It is not just the dancers. It is not just the sculptors. It includes engineers and students, accountants and nurses, neighbors and homemakers. All of us, made in the image of God, are artists, creative types, culture makers, world shapers, invited to participate in God's creative, ongoing creative, and recreative work. I suppose the other reason I like this movie, not only does it remind us of the importance of creative types and invite all of us to be creative, it reminds us of the importance of dreams. And there's an encouragement in this movie to keep on dreaming. You may be familiar with these words. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. When Martin Luther King spoke those words on August 28th, 1963, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he stirred the imaginations, actually better said, God used the words that he gave him to stir 250,000 people who had gathered in Washington, D.C. and enabled them, maybe for the first time, to consider, to see a world that was different than the one that they were living within at the time, a world that was within reach. I think with that story, we are reminded of the power of dreams and the importance of dreaming. And as the song that I referred to a second ago from that movie reminds us, dreamers at times may appear to be fools to us, but they leave us with compelling pictures. They paint beautiful pictures of a world, a beautiful alternative future. And it's not just a picture they leave with us. Their dreaming somehow or another generates within us a new tenacity, a new resolve to pursue those dreams and to use what we have to bring those dreams and make them a reality. Think of how often God uses dreams and dreamers in the Old Testament time to advance his work, to pursue his mission. We read about Jacob in Genesis chapter 28. Jacob at the time is fleeing his brother Esau. He's just ripped off his brother because he deceived his father and stole the family blessing. And now Esau wants to kill him. And Jacob is running for his life. And as he's running away from his homeland, he's tired, he falls asleep, and God gives him a dream. It's a dream in which we learn for the first time about Jacob's ladder, and there's this ascending and descending of these angelic beings. And in there, God speaks in this vision, he speaks a fresh word to Jacob. He speaks the promise, the blessing that he gave to his grandfather, Abraham. And he speaks it in a fresh way to him. And he reminds Jacob that from his seed he will build a great nation. He is going to give him many descendants. And he is going to give him this land that is flowing with milk and honey. God knows that Jacob is running from home. He knows that he's going to be gone from his homeland for a long time. And in that vision he says to you, and in this promise, there's also included this word, I will bring you back to this land. That would be a word that would fuel Jacob as he lived in a foreign place. It would give him something to keep going along the rough road that he was traveling, knowing that someday God would bring him back. Isaiah chapter 6, I believe. Isaiah has a vision. It's a vision of God, and in that vision he sees God seated on the throne. And he comes to realize the holiness of God. And he bows before God saying, I am not worthy, I am not worthy. I'm an unclean man. I'm a man of unclean lips. And the Lord, in this vision he gives him, has these angelic beings going over to the coals of the fire, and he picks up the coals, and they come over, and they use those coals to sear his lips, a sign of purification. And I think in that moment, at least the rest of us reading this story should realize that God doesn't call those who are sanctified. God sanctifies those that he called. Up to that point, Isaiah wasn't really to be God's spokesperson, wasn't ready to be his prophet. But with that vision, he received the affirmation that he needed to go into that work and to follow God and be his spokesman to the people of God. Ezekiel chapter 37. We read about that valley of dry bones. Ezekiel has a vision from the Lord. And this valley of dry bones, millions of them, was a picture of the nation of Israel. The people of God who had wandered from God, who were in spiritual apathy, who had rebelled against God, and basically they were dead. And now on the cusp of being conquered by a foreign nation and being led off into captivity, they needed a word of hope. And in this vision, the prophet is called to prophesy the Spirit. And the Spirit blows across those bones, and those rattly bones start to come together, and they stand as if all those pieces belong together. You could see the human outline, and flesh is added to those bones. And that whole coming to life again in that dream was a word for the people. Yes, you are going into exile. These are tough times, but there will be a day down the road where God will renew you. God will bring revitalization. You will be restored again as the people of God. You know what all that dreaming had in common? What every one of those visions and dreams, you know what they had in common? They were all rooted in a word from God. All of them had a divine origin. There's lots of dreaming that goes on, but sometimes I wonder if we have the wrong dreams, because often our dreams have not a divine source, but a human source. They are conjured up out of human ingenuity. Very much like what took place during Jeremiah's day. As the people of God are about to be conquered by the Babylonians and taken into exile, the people are fearful, and the prophets wanted to encourage the people. Basically, they conjured up some lies and said, we heard this word from the Lord, to speak so-called hope to the people of God. They said, oh, don't worry, you're not going to be taken into exile. We're entering into a time of peace. Wrong. In fact, the Lord told Jeremiah that he needed to tell the people to beware of these prophets. Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 16. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Do not listen to what the prophets are prophesying to you. They fill you with false hopes. They speak visions from their own minds, not from the mouth of the Lord. You think those prophets would learn? The people of God were conquered. They were taken into exile. And shortly there, those same prophets started to prophesy again. Yeah, we're in exile, but we're not going to be here very long. We're going to be going back pretty soon. Wrong again. And Jeremiah had to explain to them, no, you're here for some time now. You're going to be here for 70 years, so you better settle down and figure out how to live in this place. And then God spoke a real word to Jeremiah to give the people hope. Over the last 10 years, if you check with Bible Gateway, they will say the number one verse that's searched, that's looked up, and that's shared is John 3:16. For God so loved, and I think you know how that verse goes. The second most popular verse Year in and year out over the last 10 years? Any guesses based on what we're talking about? Jeremiah 29, verse 11. A word from God for Jeremiah that painted a picture, a way forward for the people of God in exile. For you know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. And in that word, there was a beautiful picture given of how they should live life. Build houses, plant gardens, marry, have children. Seek the peace and prosperity of the place, the people to which I have led you to, and as they prosper, you will too. That word, that image, sustained the people of God in exile. This whole thing is a reminder for me that, well, dreaming is important and we want our imaginations to be stretched and stirred. We need imaginations that are, well, as the esteemed Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann refers to it as, we need prophetic imaginations. Not ones that rely on human ingenuity, but imaginations that are stretched and stirred because God speaks a word first. He gives the image. He gives the picture, and that is going to be what fuels us. Now, some of you might say, I don't know if I'm really into this dream and picture and vision stuff. I'm not sure God does that stuff much anymore. On the day of Pentecost, when the Spirit is poured out, and the church is conceived, is birthed, and comes into being, by the way, that introduces an age that we still live in. Often the scriptures refer to it as the last days. We're in that same age, the church age. As Peter stands up and prophesies and explains to the people of God what's going on, he uses a word, a prophecy from the Old Testament that again was a picture for the people of God. In that word, as Peter explains to everybody what's going on here with the outpouring of the Spirit, he uses the words of Joel and speaks it again. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. And when I listen to that, I'm reminded that God isn't done with using visions and dreams to speak to his people, to fuel them and to propel them forward, to keep them going. And think about how God uses some of those dreams in New Testament times. He gives Ananias a vision, and basically in that vision he's told to go and speak to Saul, the Christian killer, who now is Paul. And I can't imagine any of us wanting to do that if you're a follower of Jesus. But in the vision, God reminds him now that Saul belongs to him, that something has happened in the life of Saul, now Paul. That vision was enough to give him courage and confidence that he sought out Saul, the Christian killer, and ministered to him. Peter later on is enjoying himself on the roof of a house, and God gives him a vision. He falls into a sleep. He has this vision. The sheet comes down, and on the sheet are all these animals that were unclean animals for Jews. They could have nothing to do with it. Peter's a Jew. And in that dream, he's told to, kill the animals, cook them, eat the animals. And Peter said, no, I can't have anything to do with this. These are unclean animals. And the word that came back from the heavens from the Lord was, don't call anything unclean that I've made clean. And it's not long later that Peter is invited to enter the house of a Gentile. Jews and Gentiles, clean, unclean. Ooh, can't do this. It would be scandalous for him to go in this house. But God uses a vision ahead of time to prepare him for what he needed to do next, a barrier to overcome. And the story of Stephen, the one who spoke out for Jesus, testified to Jesus, and he was stoned to death for his testimony, for his witness. In the midst of being stoned, God gives him a vision, one to give him confidence and courage. And as he looks up, he sees the heavens open up. There he sees the throne of God, and he sees Jesus standing by that throne. Actually, it's an uncommon picture. Often Jesus is seated beside the throne, on the throne. Jesus, it's almost as if he's walking forward to get Stephen, to bring him into the heavens. Regardless of what the interpretation of the dream is, it was enough to give him confidence and courage, and he kept declaring Jesus while they were killing him. Over and over again, God uses visions and dreams, Old Testament, New Testament. In the age in which we live now, I don't believe that God is done using dreams and visions to speak to us. I believe by his Spirit, he still stirs our imaginations and invites us in a creative way to imagine the great things that he could do. And in that imagining, God will speak to us. Think with me just before I let this go. Consider how this book that God gives us ends. What's the last book of the Bible? A little louder? Revelation. What was Revelation? It's a dream. It's a vision. The whole book of Revelation is a vision that God gives by his Spirit to John as he's living in exile on the island of Patmos. The very last way God communicates with us is through a vision, and he doesn't make any bones about it. We're told at the very beginning it's a vision that John the seer received, and he was meant to share it with others, and that continues to be a source of encouragement and courage for all the people of God as we move forward in human history, imagining where it is that God is leading all of human creation. It inspires us as followers of Jesus to keep living and to keep living well, even in the face of adversity, even when it's extremely difficult. Matthew Skinner, who served at one point on the faculty of Lutheran Seminary, has this to say as he reflects on Pentecost Sunday and the celebrations that often are observed around that time of year. Sunday's Pentecost observances are more than a celebration of the past. They are not merely an end to Easter or a chance to launch summer programming. They are not opportunities for stoking nostalgia about the church's supposed glory days. Who needs that? Pentecost, instead, is an invitation to dream, my friends. For when a community of faith quits dreaming dreams, it has little to offer either its members or the wider world. Like any good dream, these dreams involved adopting new perspectives on what's possible, rousing our creativity to free us from conventional expectations. They help us to see that maybe what we thought was outlandish actually lies within reach. Maybe I can find freedom from what binds me. Maybe there is justice. It is possible. Maybe I can make a difference. Maybe a person's value isn't determined by her income. Maybe the future of our economy or our society or our planet is not yet determined. Maybe God is here with me, even if my current struggles never go away. To dream. An invitation to dream. So, friends, what dream has God given you? You as a person? What dream has God given Pine Grove Church? What vision, what picture of the future has he given you to sustain you, to fuel you, to stir your imagination so that you can see what is possible through his grace and his power? Do you have the right dream? There's lots of dreaming that goes on. Probably lots of dreams represented in the room here today. Sometimes our dreams are the wrong dreams. They're a little too self-indulgent. A bigger house, early retirement, good-looking kids with straight white teeth that graduate and go on to law school. Are those the dreams that God has given us? Or does he have something else for us? Are your dreams rooted in a word from the Lord? It's the book of Proverbs, chapter 28, verse 19, where we are reminded that without vision, the people perish. But remember, a better translation of that verse is without revelation, without a word from God, people perish. They throw off restraint. Whatever dreams, whatever imagining we do, it needs to be rooted in something that God gives us by his Spirit, or we're wandering blindly. For some of us, I know the struggle is that we've quit dreaming. We had dreams at one point, good dreams, dreams that were from the Lord. But along the way, there have been too many failures, too many frustrations, too many disasters, too many disappointments, too many dreams dashed. And you're tired. Despondency has set in. You can't be bothered. You don't have the energy to dream anymore. You've given up. You've thrown in the towel. You're waving the white flag. I can't dream anymore. Remember that while God gives dreams, and He gives us pictures of what's possible in the future, He does not promise that the pursuit of those dreams will be easy. There may be barriers. There may be hardships along the way. That's why He gives us those dreams in the first place, so that we can imagine what's possible. And He wants us to keep on dreaming. Sometimes it's tough, like that songwriter said, here's to the mess we make. Sometimes in the pursuit of our dreams, we have missteps. Here's to the hearts that ache. Sometimes the things that we pursue don't turn out in the way that we thought they would. Keep dreaming. Keep pursuing. I want to end with a story about a friend. Actually, it's a family that's a friend of our family, somebody who we were at church with for the longest time. I still connect with the mom and dad. 3 children. Their oldest, a beautiful girl, went to the same youth group that my oldest son did, a year older. This girl, beautiful and stunning on the outside, every bit as much on the inside, smart, competent, lots and lots of friends. Family received the sad news at one point that she was diagnosed with a form of cervical cancer at a young age, just in her early 20s. They discovered it because they were struggling to have children, and the doctor had more than bad news that it's not going to be possible if you have kids. Your life is in jeopardy here. In the early days, she had to contend with all the dreams that were dashed, wanting to live a long life, wanting to have children, wanting to raise children, live the rest of her days with her husband that she loved deeply. Those were her dreams, and now they were all threatened. Early in her journey, shortly after the diagnosis, the Spirit of God directed her to a verse that provided her with a roadmap for a way to live. The verse the Spirit of God led her to was Romans chapter 12, verse 12. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer. To a woman with cancer, here was the word of the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. She received it as an image for the kind of life, a picture of the life that God was inviting her to live now, even though she had this diagnosis. This dream supplanted or trumped the one that she previously had and became her roadmap. And for the better part of the next 2 years, she lived out that life with lots of joy and with patience and with faithfulness, constantly praying not just for herself, but those around her. And her life, my friends, glowed beyond the way most healthy people's lives were glowing. Her joy was infectious. Her commitment to the Lord was magnetic. People couldn't help but want to be around her and listen to her. It was a living miracle that somebody with this diagnosis, nothing that they could do about it, could live that well and that fully. In the final weeks leading up to her death, this is true about that whole journey, but it was markedly so in the last several weeks. It was almost as if she had entered heaven early and was living out that perfect life on the other side. And as you looked at her life in those final weeks, it was as if the veil of heaven had been pulled back, and we were all looking at what life looks like on the other side. Before she got to heaven, she was on her way to heaven, but before she got there, before she crossed that line that we refer to as death, it's as if heaven came and permeated her life and received her and took her a little early. Still living here, but very much with a foot firmly in the world to come. I spoke at her funeral, which was held at the Meeting House, its main campus in Oakville. If you haven't heard the word Meeting House before, it's a very large church. And the auditorium there was packed with people from every walk of life. The power of this life lived after a picture that God had given her. Spoke not to just dozens, not to hundreds, but thousands of people. When God gives us a word, a picture, an image, a dream, a vision. He's not just trying to tickle our minds. He's inviting us to live a certain way, to pursue a certain path. And if we're faithful, and if we're obedient and we live that out, don't be surprised that you'll be able to step back at some point and look at a changed world. That's what dreaming God's dreams can do in this world, can make a difference. Not easy to do. So I'm going to pray and give thanks that God works this way in our life, but I'm also going to ask for help that we see well and that we follow in the direction of whatever God is inviting us into. So let's pray together. God, I want to acknowledge that this talk about dreams and visions and imagining great ideas for the future, it's very easy to over-romanticize. Until the picture of the path that you want us to walk in, the destiny that you are calling us towards, requires something of us. There may be barriers for us to overcome, hurdles for us to transcend, difficult times to move through in our pursuit of faithfulness, pursuing those dreams. I suspect there are some here this morning who have dreamed earlier in life and abandoned those dreams because it was too hard. Maybe there are people here right now in the midst of making that decision. I think I've heard from you, Lord. You gave me a wonderful picture of what could be. I'm just not sure I have what it takes to keep going. God, would you speak that vision, that picture, that dream, that word freshly again in the mind, in the heart, in the inner being of that person today? Give them what they need so that they are sustained, so that they are fueled, so that they are passionate about the direction that you've invited them in. And God, for those of us who aren't practiced with allowing your Spirit to stir our imaginations, would you give us that capacity? Especially as we, a church, Pine Grove here, wonder about the future, the collective future that you might have for us. Help us. Teach us how to pay attention to the Spirit's rhythms and movements in our life. Help us to hear his voice. And whatever picture, whatever dream, whatever vision you give us collectively, Lord, grant us also the courage to move in that direction, to embrace what it is that you have for us. Take us out of our normal way of seeing. Take off the blinders. Give us the new perspective. And all this we are asking, not just for our own well-being, but because we believe you have a greater future for this world in mind, and we, as your people, want to be a part of it. We want to help to see it come into being. Help us with our part in the actualization of that future world that you have for us. We pray in the Savior's name. Amen.